Great, yeah, so my name is Loïc Van Cutsem, and indeed I work for BeeOdiversity, which is a Belgian company active throughout Europe, and we help corporates and public entities to measure biodiversity and improve biodiversity. I'm here with my colleague Cyril, and I'm very pleased to also have Alyssa sharing the floor with me today, representing Siemens, one of our dear partners and clients here in Germany. So I'll be providing a bit of background on why biodiversity matters and explain a bit what we do, in particular a monitoring system that we've developed using bees. And then I'll hand over the stage to Alyssa, who will illustrate a bit how they're using this methodology and what she's doing with Siemensstadt in Berlin. Great, let's get started. I'll just check the time, okay. Okay, so I just want to start with, and we've discussed it a bit this morning, thanks to Jérôme and others already, but the 5 main causes of biodiversity decline. I think it's important to remind them. Climate and climate change, of course, is one of them, and which is being addressed by all of us and discussed very much today. But there's more than climate behind the loss of biodiversity. The second one is the change in land and sea use. So think of deforestation, for instance, driven by agricultural expansion and other drivers. So that's reason number 2. Third is exploitation of resources. So overfishing, for instance, overhunting, overfishing, mining or extreme mining, etc. Fourth reason is pollution, which includes pesticides and different chemicals as well. And the fifth is invasive species, which obviously non-native species kind of threatening the habitat, the nutrients, and the life of native species. So these are kind of the 5 big causes of biodiversity decline. By the way, invasive species alone, it's estimated that the cost of managing invasive species approaches 160 billion euros per year. So this is just that one as such has a massive economic impact as well. But at the same time, as you know, and the beauty of it is, of course, we all depend on nature's services, right? So-called ecosystem services. The air we breathe, the clean water we drink, medicine, food, etc. depends on healthy ecosystems and on biodiversity. It's estimated also that half of our economy, of the global GDP, depends on natural capital. So it's absolutely essential. I heard someone the other day saying that tackling climate change was of course crucial, but it would define how we live on Earth, and tackling biodiversity would define if we live on Earth. So that's how she was kind of framing the urgency and importance of handling biodiversity in addition to climate. And the value of pollination services alone is estimated to be around 150 billion per year. So these amazing ecosystem services, these services that nature provides, are absolutely essential to us, to our businesses, and to our societies. Yet what we're seeing, and it's fantastic, of course, and needs to be further supported and encouraged, is a lot of progress on the climate change front. We've discussed this a bit this morning, the challenges of scope 3, etc. But we see that many companies are now, of course, totally aware of the challenge, and the big majority of them are defining science-based targets and really addressing that. This is not yet the case for biodiversity. Some of the metrics you see here, this is based on a survey done on the global Fortune 100 companies in the US, which clearly show the difference still in terms of maturity between climate change and biodiversity. And actually, they're interlinked. Climate change is one of the causes of biodiversity loss, and protecting and restoring our ecosystems is probably the best ally to fight climate change as well. So you can't really distinguish them, and we need to address, go beyond climate change and also embrace the complexity of biodiversity. We're seeing more and more regulatory framework standards being developed in the field of biodiversity as well. We've talked this morning about the SBTI. There's the equivalent, so-called SBTN, which is under development. They actually released last week their first draft of this methodology. So how can corporates, and how will corporates in the future have to define ways to manage, measure, and improve their impact on biodiversity, land, ocean, soil, etc. So there's a lot of, sorry. been jumping. Okay, that was not meant to happen. So there's a lot going on there in terms of standards development, metrics, and it's a very complicated matter because what biodiversity is seems to be moving along, but it doesn't matter. You can't simplify it with one unit of carbon, right? It's much more complex. There are different metrics needed. It depends totally on the geography and the area we're talking about, so it needs to be addressed locally as well. That's one. The second is there's an innovation agenda behind this as well. We've talked a bit about nature-based solutions this morning, so it's really worth anticipating this upcoming trend, not only from a compliance regulation perspective, but also to understand the strategic opportunities and innovation opportunities that companies or public entities have with biodiversity. So what do? We basically help corporates and public entities to measure, manage, and improve their impact on biodiversity and to reduce pollutants. We do that on a strategic, it's automated apparently, okay. Both on a strategic level, so helping our clients to understand their impact on biodiversity, define a biodiversity strategy, and also on an operational level on site, which is actually our main focus area. So how to understand the impacts that your activities have on specific sites, how to measure that, and how to improve that. We do this in over 15 countries now in Europe and in the US, monitoring over 100,000 hectares. And we've been able to see some great improvements in terms of biodiversity and reduction of pesticides on numerous sites of clients we work with. Yeah, doesn't matter too much. It's just meant to illustrate that we work in pretty much all sectors, and I think it's just important to mention that biodiversity is and will become a material topic in all fields of work. Let me just illustrate one. There are many ways to measure and monitor biodiversity. We have some that we've developed, and there are many complementary actors working with other technologies and methodologies. There's a big need, by the way, to start harmonizing and integrating this and standardizing it. I just want to illustrate one of our tools, and we really believe in this mantra. If you can't measure it, it's difficult to manage it. So we're trying to bring this data and help our clients to understand and measure biodiversity, and then be able to act in a very tailored and relevant way. And we do this in different ways. I'll just talk about the bio-monitoring, which is a unique methodology that we've developed 10, 12 years ago using bees. So we basically use bees as natural drones. Bees, as you know, pollinate flowers. They travel a lot. They cover up to 700 hectares, so 1.5 kilometer radius from the beehive, meaning a superficie of 700 hectares, and they visit over 4 billion flowers per year in total. And they bring back pollen and nectar and other ingredients to the beehive. What we do is we basically we work with beekeepers, our own or existing beekeepers, depending on where we're working, and we ask them to add a very small trap in the existing beehive, which collects super small samples of pollen when the bees fly back in the beehive. They send us this pollen and we analyze it. So we rely on, we don't provide the hardware. The hardware for us are the beehives and the beekeepers. We do the data crunching and the interpretation of this pollen. And what we find in this pollen is the DNA of all the plants that were visited by these bees. So it gives us a lot of information on plant diversity. We find information on pesticides and on heavy metals. So there's lots of data. Lots of relevant data that we can find in this pollen, up to 500 different pesticides, heavy metals, and plant diversity. And this tool, the neat thing about the tool is that it covers large areas. It's very representative because these bees need to collect and visit many types of flowers to collect their own nutriments. So it's a very representative sampling methodology and very cheap. We work with bees basically to do this, and they're usually available, and if not, can be easily implemented. So it helps us to really track, for instance, on a quarterly or even monthly basis, the plant diversity on a specific territory or site, and identify drops and be able to then directly act and mitigate those measures. But it helps us also identify pollutants and match that with other databases and information we have to identify also where these pollutants are coming from, and be able to simply engage with those stakeholders, those farmers, or whoever actors are in the territory and influencing the biodiversity, and engage them in improving that, as well as measuring the impact of pollution on health. So basically, we crunch all this data, we interpret it, and we sell back to clients and cities data, reports, benchmarks, metrics. So a baseline measurement tool and a way on a quarterly basis to then monitor your progress. And of course, once we have these metrics, it's easier to go in discussions with partners and clients on how to improve. How can you change your management practices? If you're using pesticides, for instance, how can you engage and who should you engage when it comes to pesticides? How can you change your planting or plant management strategy, etc.? So these are just examples of the kind of metrics and reports that we provide on a quarterly basis to clients. Alyssa can touch a bit on this and how they're using it within her project. I just wanted, just this slide is, I think I mentioned it quickly, but the complexity of biodiversity, it's coming. I know most of you have been struggling over the last years with carbon as such. I've been there as well. I remember starting Scope 3 carbon exercises 15 years ago. It was really complex. This is coming, and it's probably going to be even more complex, but absolutely necessary and relevant. And there's a lot that's being developed in terms of methodologies and standards to help you with this. So I'll pass it on or just quickly illustrate maybe 2 or 3 use cases without going into details, but we have kind of 3 big categories of clients we work with. One would be kind of smart cities, territories, natural reserves. This is an example of a project in the north of Belgium where we've been monitoring since 10 years, a very big territory, identifying heavy metals and being able to understand that these heavy metals were linked to the industrial port activities and thereby change that. We've identified pesticides. We're able to identify that they were linked to the potato farmers in that territory and therefore start discussions with the potato farmers to change those practices, not necessarily to suppress pesticides, but at least to use them in a more reasonable way. And we've identified also that there was a lack of native plant species, and therefore we changed the planting strategy and we're able to increase on their side the plant diversity by a factor 4, which brings back a lot of new pollinators and species that were not present in this territory, which has benefits for the whole ecosystem. So that's one type of project. We also work a lot with companies who depend on natural resources, so water producers, for instance, who face a huge challenge to monitor their water catchment areas, so these big territories where the water is captured in the soil. And they use this methodology to monitor that and improve that, but also food producers or cosmetics who are eager to understand and improve their practices. And finally, other industries, quarries, more and more solar developers who are perceived as having a negative impact on the environment and are interested, again, to be able to monitor this, come up with objective data and act upon it to improve it. I'll leave it there and just perhaps invite Alyssa to I'll bring up your slides. Here we go. To explain a bit your story, and thanks for being here.
Okay, hi everyone. So I see that the formatting has been changed a little bit, so never mind. So my name is Alyssa Weskamp. I am at Siemens, more specifically at Siemens Real Estate. So what we do is we manage all the Siemens properties, we develop them, we transform them where necessary to match the demands of the Siemens units that are working within them. And the project that I'm working on is called Siemensstadt Square. It's, as you can see, we are are calling it the city of the future. We have high ambitions for this project. So I need to give you just a little bit of background on this project. We're in Berlin, not quite in the center, but close enough. And this is a site that Siemens has been operating on for 125 years. So this was there before Berlin was even there. So, well, the city was there, but it wasn't that big yet. So Siemens has some very iconic industrial buildings there, which are going to remain, of course. But what we're doing now, so you can see the site, it's around 73 hectares of land, including all the public spaces in between, but mainly it's an industrial site with some fences around it. It's a closed site. And so over the last 125 years, the needs have changed. So we don't need that much space for industrial uses anymore. And now the city has encroached around, so we have some potential here on the land, and we have decided to transform this into a mixed-use urban district. So we're going to transform this by moving the production into 2 hubs in the north and the south, and then we're going to transform it into what you can see here, a mixed-use urban district with around 1 million or 1.2 million square meters of floor area. It's going to be mixed with around 2,700 residential units. There's going to be hotels, conference areas, lots of business areas, but also we're going to keep the industrial production, of course. So we have big plans for this area, for this site, and this is the biggest project that Siemens Real Estate has ever done. So my role in this project is to push all the individual project teams to integrate more sustainability aspects. We're trying to push some innovative topics, not just fulfill the baselines, which of course we have to, and trying to really get on the big topics that are coming along, such as urban mining, circularity, and of course biodiversity, among others. So let me just talk a little bit about what Siemens Real Estate is doing in terms of biodiversity in general. So right now, like so many companies, so many corporate real estates, we have a location-based approach. So that means we don't have one big strategy for the whole world, which, to be honest, for biodiversity makes a lot of sense because no location is like the other. So we have different aspects or different measures depending on the sites. So we have some that you may have heard of, that you might know from your own locations, things like no pesticides for the landscaping, like more tree planting initiatives, that kind of thing. Beehives are becoming very popular without any specific additional features, just to have some bees on site with all the bee colony collapse disorder that people have been hearing about. But we also have some more unusual measures at sites around the world. For example, in India, we have a site where there's a problem with snakes. So they collect the snakes, they re-release them into the wild, whereas earlier they would have destroyed them. We have nature trails on some sites around the world. And we have sheep for lawn care on some sites. So some more unusual approaches here and there. But with this really large development, we wanted to take things a step further from just individual measures that are just sort of stuck together to a more holistic approach and a more evidence-based approach as well. But let me just show you 2 more sites that we've been doing things on, just 2 examples from around the world. Siemens Campus Erlangen is the second biggest project that we've ever done. And here we're already doing a lot of different things like keeping dead wood in place and existing trees. Of course, green roofs as much as we can, green facades where we can do them, biodiversity upgrades on structures that have to remain in place, and of course a lot of biodiversity measures like nesting aids and so on and so forth, and a locally adapted tree concept with a lot of local species, but also some experimental climate resilient species. So here we're already sort of trying to have a more holistic approach and add a lot of things together and integrate them into the landscaping as well. But there are other sites that have other measures. Just one example here again from India, where they had a large tree planting initiative using the Miyawaki method. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it involves very dense planting with a high diversity of trees, and it has a very high success ratio. So really it's a location-based approach. So what are we doing with biodiversity on site? So we have 2 hives. I don't know if you can see this very well, the contours of our site on the left-hand side, the project area. So we have 2 hives on site that fly over our project area, but also beyond. So in a sense, they're the first residents of our site. And like our residents, we're not going to keep them trapped on our site. We're going to allow them to leave and explore the neighborhood as well. And so we have a picture of what's going on our site, but also in the neighborhood at large. And this is important for urban development in general, because we don't develop islands. We develop something within an existing network of transportation, of social infrastructures, of all kinds of things that make a city what it is. So we have these 2 hives on site. Of course, it's a nice side effect that we have some honey to give away to our partners, but that's not really the reason that we're doing this. So we wanted to have a look at how biodiversity is changing over the course of our project development. So this is really something that we aim to do over the long term. Our project is intended to run up to 2035. At least. We know construction projects generally tend to take a bit longer than planned. So we want to see over a long period of time how things change, and we can use this information to adapt our landscaping strategy. So Siemens is going to be responsible for creating all the public spaces, including the public landscaping, the streetscapes with their greenery. We have some sites that we are developing ourselves with new buildings, and we have other areas that we are just qualifying for development by others later on. And so we want to see how is what we're doing actually impacting biodiversity. And so I'm going to share some results with you, because we want to share these results with other actors as well. We started this last year, and so we see already that here on the left-hand side, within our flight radius, we can see the number of plant species is pretty good compared to other biomonitoring projects. This is the benchmarking aspect that these guys do. And so we can see we have quite a high diversity, and we also asked them to compare it to other urban sites, so that we don't just have a benchmark compared to, for example, agricultural areas. We have the results for the species and plant families, and we can see that we have quite a good variety of plants. We have a higher percentage of wild and local species, which means that so we have species that are pretty good at catering to the local fauna. So this is also an indicator for climate resilience. So right now we have a pretty good balance on site. So that's fine for now. We want to see if it stays that way. And if it doesn't, then we can adapt our landscaping strategy to compensate for any gaps in the pollen. For example, we can see whether in the summer there's a dip in availability, and then we can add flowering species that flower in the gaps. So we're pretty happy with our results so far. This is something that we also want to share with other actors, local actors, the municipality, for example, and local stakeholder groups in biodiversity, because nobody's really doing a comprehensive long-term monitoring of biodiversity right now, or rather everybody's using different strategies. And so I don't know if you've heard about it, but Germany just launched, I think last year or the year before, a national biodiversity monitoring group to determine the standards at which we're going to be monitoring this stuff in the future. And what's already pretty clear is, well, we talked to some experts, and DNA metabarcoding, the type of analysis that biodiversity does, is going to play a huge part. So it's going to be a basis for some of these future standards. And yeah, we want to be ahead of the curve on this. We want to know already where we stand. We want to be ready for all of the requirements from the EU taxonomy and other ESG rating systems. And we also, of course, want to use this for communication. So this is a way to start a conversation with other local actors about what we're doing on site. It also shows our commitment to improve the environment in different ways on our site. And yeah, so we really want to use this as a tool for multiple aspects of our development. So far, we're pretty happy with what's going on here. We haven't started the conversation with other actors yet, but of course, as we can see, the flight radius goes beyond our site, so others will be interested in what's going on here. So I think that's it from me. If you guys have any questions later, go ahead. Thank you.